Yes, I feel a bit of an intruder here, in the sense that I'm not an active computer scientist involved in co-creating platforms, digital and all the rest of it. A long time ago, I was the director of the ESRC's Programming, Information and Communications Technologies. I'm a social scientist, actually I'm a human geographer by background. Since I retired in 2008, I've been fairly active in terms of research and policy about the role of universities as institutions in civil society. And so I'm going to talk about the role of the Civic University and impact. There's a link, this whole idea of the responsibility of universities to their society has really taken off. It's a global network, and if you click on that link there, you will see something from the network, the QS rankings of universities, which are basically ranking universities on conventional academic citations, which is being challenged all over the place for a notion of the broader responsibility of universities to society. Okay, just some heads up of what I want to talk to you about is that across the globe, universities and particularly the leaders, vice-chancellors, rectors, are beginning to recognise their responsibility to society, especially in their local communities and other places facing the challenges that are identified in the UN Sustainable Development Goal. And it's quite interesting, although we're heavily digital, most of the partnerships that I was picking up in your projects were local. People, from London, from Newcastle. So in other words, not surprisingly, a digital economy and all the rest of it. It's the social relations that you have with your communities that often spark some of these projects and collaborations. And I'll come on to the Sustainable Development Goals in a minute. And the critical point also is that the way that universities can interact through teaching and research with their communities clearly is being transformed by digital technologies. So the whole way in which the academy works with the wider society, you know all this, but it's not so many other people who tend to know it. It tends to be buried away in things that are practice and not necessarily informing the way the institutions are thinking about their role. And critically important is that digital is underpinning new models of research and innovation, which are demand-led. They involve the co-production of knowledge within what are called quadruple helix partnerships, and your framing, I mean, this is my jargon from social science, is the quadruple helix. This, by the way, is called the helix, this site. Not many people know why it's called the helix. It started off with the double helix down on the Centre for Life, which was the Crick and Watson helix. And then the triple helix, which is university, business and government working together. And then someone said, hey, wait a minute, what about society? And it became the quadruple helix. And so, although it's not explicitly called that in your framework, it is, you're working within a quadruple helix framework. These are the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure you've seen all of those. But in many ways, digital technologies are affecting many of these issues. You're in the area of peace and justice, sustainable citizen communities, responsible consumption. Many of these big goals are now informing the priorities of the research councils, the priorities of universities. And so these are really taking root across the globe in the way in which universities interact with their society. And a report that I would refer you to, which is, I think, interesting because it is a global report. It's from the Global University Network on Innovation, sponsored by the United Nations. And it's called Higher Education in the World Towards a Socially Responsible University, Balancing the Global and the Local. So this is the whole idea of the responsibility we as the academy have to our society as well as to the global networks. And there are a whole set of challenges in there, which is worth picking up from. So universities, in your report, your projects, there's about working with business. Much of the stuff that universities do with business is narrowly defined in terms of competitiveness. It's how can you be more competitive in the global economy. But also another role that we do in universities as we create and disseminate knowledge urgently need to shift the world into a sustainable and resilient future. You can't do that without working with citizens and people. It's the decisions that people make around sustainable behaviours and so on that's critically important. But universities are part of both worlds. So I spend a lot of my time trying to say that the social world, the triple helix, the quadruple helix, has to also relate to the triple helix. You have to both work with business and society. And we need to make explicit this dual engagement with the humans, with the immediate needs of their local societies and with the global challenges of the world. And universities can be part of the problem. We are part of the problem of globalisation. Just look at do an audit of the planes going backwards and forwards across the from if you did an audit at Newcastle Airport, you'd find probably a third of the people on the planes are academics. So we are part of much of the global movement and flows of people. That's positive, but there's also challenges associated with that. So there's some really quite big challenges, and what this report recommends, I think is important in terms of what you're thinking about, is adopting the mantle of the civic university, pursuing the public good by aligning its interests as a university with those of society and working collaboratively with other HEIs, and we've got several collaborative partnerships here with Northumbria and Newcastle, maximising their collective impact. Playing a proactive role in getting these sustainable development goals, including local agendas involving education, research, and engaging with global and local communities. Educating future generations. I'm not so sure how far the work you're doing in these projects are actually involving students and feeding back into your teaching and your other activities. Conducting transversal reviews of their curriculum. There's a whole set of issues about how we teach our students to be, and how they use digital technology in their behaviours to act in a socially responsible way. So we need to create a new generation of students who understand those issues, not just me. And widening, extending access to successful participation in higher education by serving the needs of an increasingly diverse student from 18 to 100 years old. And I was intrigued to see one of these partnerships that we're beginning to hear about from here on working on security for older citizens. So this is an incredibly important issue. And so there's a whole set of deep things lying behind all of this stuff. And I just put some quotes in from academics. How is this affecting academic behaviour? And this is one of our most distinguished professors in this university, who I interviewed a couple of years ago for my book on the university in the city. And it was really interesting to see his view of what his responsibilities were. The notion of treating, and he was a sustainability scientist, the notion of treating our city as a seedbed for sustainability initiatives is a potent one. The vision is of academics out in the community working with local groups and businesses on practical initiatives, that's what you're doing, to solve problems and promote sustainable development and growth. This necessitates that we proceed in a very open manner, seeking to overcome barriers to thought, action and engagement. Barriers between researchers and citizens, which is exactly what you're doing, between the urban and the rural, I think there's a rural project in your scheme, between the social and natural sciences, between teaching and research and enterprise. Now, I didn't prompt him to say all that. I was interviewing him, as a good social scientist would do, trying to probe what his view of what his role was as an academic. So I think that's quite a powerful, and I'm just beginning to start understanding how many computer scientists work, and you are very much that view. So I thought I'd have a quote from a computer scientist in here, and this is a piece that's written for me for something I was doing on leadership in place by Pete Wright and Patrick Olivier, about the whole idea of public service transformation. And it is I think, a very insightful approach, because not only do you have to work at the micro level, which I think you're doing, but I think you have to be operating at a meso level and a system level, because you only work at the micro level. You don't change the behaviour of big institutions like the NHS, local government and so on. You miss a trick. So somehow, how does this micro level work? This maybe picks up what Clara's going to say about policy. You have to be thinking about the systemic changes around the field which you're working at the micro level. So in a way, I can't read you all of that, but it is a very, very powerful stroke. If you're interested, it's a public domain paper, so maybe Clara can circulate it. And what are the barriers to doing all of this? Well, This is a quote from a former director of the London School of Economics. "We treat our opportunity to research not as a public trust, but as a reward for success in past studies. Rewards for research are deeply tied up with the production of academic hierarchy and the relative standing of institutions." You know, you're in a top institution, people, you know, it affects salaries, blah, blah, blah. But public support, very big important, but public support for universities is based on the effort to educate citizens in general, to share knowledge, to distribute as widely as possible in accordance with publicly articulated purposes. So this is quite an important context for what you are doing in this project. And that comes from a very interesting journal. If you're a philosopher and you know your Marx, you'll know what Thesis 11 is. Not just to study the world, but change it. So I do think this whole issue, the extent to which we are, in what we're doing, or you're doing, attempting to change the world. And this poses a whole issue of what we think about. You're all working in a university. What is your university like as a place to work? Well, most of you are. Some of you are outside. The traditional university looks a bit like this. It has teaching, PVC for teaching, PVC for research. You might have, and most universities do, we have to do something for society, a third mission. And by definition, that third mission is an inferior mission because it's third. Most research-intensive universities, research comes first, teaching is now catching up, and then, okay, we do a bit of third mission activity in a range of little projects out there. I'm not sure there's a pound in these projects, not a pointer on this. And the focus of the university management, and I used to be DVC here, so I know about these things, was, you know, it shouldn't be really rankings there, student satisfaction scores. And there are rankings, gold standards for TEF and all the rest of it. Research excellence rankings, third mission activities, and the emphasis there is on making money. The role of doing commercialisation and spin-outs is you create money for the university. In practice, you know, free universities make money from that, but we still invest huge amounts of money in commercialisation and spin-out support. And there's a hard boundary between the university and the external world, between the core of the university and the periphery. It's the old ivory tower, if you like. But the Civic University is very, very different. Very, very different. It involves teaching and research and engagement, and all those little bubbles that were on the outside are embedded in the core activities of teaching and research. They're not a third mission. There are some engagement activities were probably quite separate to teaching and research, but nevertheless the whole sweet spot is in the intersection of that Venn diagram. Where your teaching is involved with widening participation and community work, but equally your research as well in that. Research enhances teaching. Research has socio-economic impact, which is what you've asked me to talk about. And I'm going to go on and say something about impact in a minute. And it's all about transformative and responsive and demand. It's not just us pushing stuff out into the world. It's listening to what the outside world needs and how we can use our skills to answer that. And a very soft boundary between the university and the outside world. And something that should have been happening here is a soft boundary with the society. And I've written a book about this called The Civic University, the Policy and Leadership Challenges. And I'm going to now say something about innovation. I just put that in there because most of that stuff about what is the Civic University is in that book, and I haven't got time to talk about that. But I think what I do need to say something about, because it's in your terms of reference, is the nature of what we mean by innovation. So I'm just going to spend a couple of slides on that. Most of this stuff comes out of the EU, not out of UKRI. Some of it is registering with EPSRC. So there's a whole set of politics of the research councils around this. So you've talked about open innovation. It's quadruple helix. The point is, this is not my words. This is from the European Commission document. Quadruple helix, where government, industry, academia, civil partners work together to co-create the future. Co-create the future, and drive structural change far beyond the scope of what any one organisation or person could do alone. So how your projects plug into systems is incredibly important. This model encompasses also user-oriented innovation must take full advantage of ideas, cross-fertilisation linked to experimentation. That's what you guys in computer science are quite good at doing, experimentation, trying things out. And prototyping in a real-world session. I mean, this is really just the sort of meat and drink of my knowledge of how things work here in Open Lab. And you do this stuff, but somehow don't always register it in terms of this policy discourse. Open innovation. An invention becomes an innovation only if users become part of the value creation process. User innovation, the role of citizens and users in the innovation process as distributed sources of knowledge. This kind of public engagement is one of the aims of the Responsible Research and Innovation Programme in Horizon 2020. So this whole notion somehow of you co-producing knowledge with your citizens is incredibly important and part of the mainstream. So what I'm here is I'm just trying to tell you people, you are part of an evolving mainstream of new ways of doing work, which I think is incredibly exciting. And the whole concept, which I think is in is the notion, what is a social innovation? It's not just a technical innovation, it's new ideas, products, services that simultaneously meet social needs more effectively than alternatives and create new social relations or collaborations. And it's participative. I won't read it all, but you can get a flavour of this. This, I think, is what you are doing, but you're not necessarily articulating it in this sort of the language which I use as a social scientist. I love this quote from a review about the innovation process. I mean, in essence, so much of UK research and innovation policy still uses what I call a linear model. It's a science, we have the science, we will chuck it over the wall, businesses and the communities will pick it up, and it will somehow make a difference. And you invest more and more upstream and you hope it makes a downstream difference. That is patently not what is happening now because of digital technologies. This quote is great. Innovation is a complex ecosystem. It's not a pipeline. And this guy's saying, a big report for Council of Ministers, we need more collaboration between globally and locally between citizens, government and inventors, focus on people, places and process. And I love this last quote. Our innovation economy is not a Roman aqueduct, but a muddy pool. It requires all actors, corporate, academic, civil and political, to work together. So it's just part, I'm a missionary to try and hammer the linear model. And this idea of science working with society is quite an important one, because things that spun out of it are now embedded in the mission statement of EPSRC. Responsible, if you look at the EPSRC website, you will see responsible research and innovation. This comes from the Science with and for Society movement in Brussels. It's quite important. It used to be science and society. It's science with and for society. And you are doing that big time. And this is some quotes from their report. And they lead this concept of responsible research and innovation, which is EPSRC has taken up. And it's a process where all societal actors work together through the whole research and innovation process in order to align R&I out with the values, needs and expectations of European society. And it can be not harmonious. Okay, end up on something about the UK. Why is all this now much more important? Because we've had in higher education the crash, financial crash, and we, the universities, we've been protected from it. We are, relatively speaking, compared to many of the organisations, the voluntary sector, in local government, we are rich. You may not think that, but we are rich compared to what's happened outside. Local government's been immiserated. The charity and voluntary sector have been hammered. And you've had widening economic and social disparities, so-called discourse about left behind people and places. We are seen, and populism, Brexit, we're seen as part of the problems. Universities are not loved institutions. You get stuff in the popular press about vice chancellors' salaries. We're perceived to espouse left-wing causes. As part of the evils of globalisation that have undermined communities. Universities are, by the Brexit voting population, are not loved institutions. And we are perceived to have lobbied for Remain on the grounds of narrow self-interest. If you look at all the Remain debates, all the universities said, we want to stay in the EU, partly because we want your money for our research. That was the lobby. None of you brought a discussion about some of the things I'm talking about the universities and civil society. And last but not least, and by far probably the most dramatic, is the likely financial failure of some universities in key places. I know the list of top 10 institutions that are likely to go bust in the not too distant future. So all of that stuff led to the UK setting up the Civic University Commission. I've got a copy of our report and our guide, and I'll just pass that around. If anyone wants to look at that. And the Civic University Commission was set up in that context to challenge, in essence, the growing marketisation of higher education and what it meant for communities and places. And the need to all universities be thinking about their civic role in society and how the government could support that. And what did we find out? It was select commission, like a select committee. We went around the country, chaired by Lord Kersley. I was the vice chair. What we found, the lack of local accountability of the universities to their citizens locally, and the ignorance of local people about the contributions universities make to their community, particularly amongst the less advantaged. By and large, the elites liked their university, but the less advantaged didn't know about their university, didn't care about it. Insofar they did care about it, they were saying, my John is paying fees, and his fees should be his benefit only. Me, not for anybody else. If your university are spending it on museums and galleries, it's a waste of Johnny's money. So that was that we did focus groups and all the rest of it. Lot of bottom-up engagement activity, but a lack of strategic intent about meeting the needs of people who grow up, live and work locally, including for lifelong learning. That's what we found out from going around the country. A lot of short-term projects, and you are doing short-term projects, and I think one of the problems with a lot of research council projects is dive in, dive out. The relationships that are so critical are basically you pull out because you've done your research. What's going to happen to the project when you finish? That's a big question. I think all you need to ask. You raise the expectations of your collaborators in civil society, but what are you going to do afterwards when the project finishes? And national funding silos between various departments of government, Department of Health, Ministry of Justice, blah, blah, blah. All of those, by and large, don't talk and understand the role of universities. And so what we are recommending is development of a holistic engagement and place strategy, co-created with partners in the public and private and voluntary sectors and other local post-18 educational providers, and the whole issue so your university, how is it accountable to its communities? Big questions. Key internal process for connecting teaching, research and internationalisation, and civic engagement at the executive board level. An institutional framework that supports and rewards it, including the role of the professional services, your estates people, your procurement people, developing what I call blended professionals. You need a research and knowledge hub, which I think is going to happen to a degree with Open Lab in relation to the University of Newcastle's engagement and place strategy. We now have in this university an engagement and place strategy. We have a Dean of Engagement and Place. We have a Dean of Social Justice. So the university's taken this agenda very serious. And the site as the locality is a site for co-creation of knowledge and a living laboratory. And what we recommended, and has now happened, we asked universities to produce a civic university agreement, understanding local populations and asking what they want, understanding themselves, with working with other organisations, business, community, to agree short-term and long-term goals, set of priorities, and the output is a strategic analysis and a prioritisation and a clear action plan. Now, in fact, this university, and I think most of your universities, 53 universities have signed up for civic university agreements. I'm sorry, I didn't put a slide in with who those were. And the principal, and this university has signed up for this, as a place-based interest, this is VC saying this, we are committed to attach a high priority to the economic, social and environmental and cultural life of our local communities. Our civic role will be informed by an evidence-based analysis of the needs of our place, and digital will be critical to getting that analysis and needs analysis into the institution. Developing collaboratively with local partners informed by the voice of our local community, and I heard some of you are working with Voice North, with the Asian people here. We will collaborate with other universities and anchor institutions to overcome the challenges. So we've got both Northumbria and Newcastle University working together, and hopefully we'll plug into the college. A measurement of impact. How do you measure all of that? And this is Newcastle University's strategy. The usual thing you would fear: excellence, creativity, impact, guiding principles, working together, visibly leading, freedom and opportunity to succeed, responding to current and future challenges, education for life, research for discovery and impact, all surrounded by a global and local framework. So that's where we've got to, and I don't know, I've probably said enough, but there's a short video. Do you want me to show the video? It's 3 minutes.
Our cities are facing a number of challenges at the moment. Concern about job creation, skills retention, renewing our transport system, the cost of housing and the price of energy to supply our homes.
Imagine if there was a way for all of us to play a part in designing innovative solutions for the future.
In Newcastle, we are pioneering a radical new approach to urban living. Newcastle City Futures brings together the ideas, talent, insights and ambition of a diverse group of people in the city.
We're keen to ensure the needs of everybody, particularly most vulnerable people and communities in our society, are taken into account to make this a better place to live.
Newcastle University leads this project, but it acts more as a bridge to over 100 organisations in the region.
There's a real appetite and enthusiasm for collaborative ways of working.
By bringing people together, by taking a whole city approach to problem solving, we're creating a unique body of expertise.
We're designing homes in a city that are future-proofed for the whole population.
Our model is now being used to further over 20 projects in Newcastle and Gateshead, and each one has the ability to affect how we live now and in the future.
In shaping the city, we'll showcase the expertise of our businesses.
Other cities and universities across the world are now looking to Newcastle to replicate our model. By shaping the future, by being confident and positive, we can demonstrate not only what universities are good at, but what universities are good for.
Thanks very much. Oh, I'll put this last one up. Sorry, I threw this in at the last minute because it's a quote from a Times Higher, which would probably provoke you about the link to Google and Amazon. Amazon must think beyond being educational products and address how to continue to ensure institutional involvement with the application of knowledge, learning the lives and works of individuals, blah, blah, blah. It's very interesting. What it's saying is we as institutions have to change, and I think you people at the coalface of new ways of doing work have to get back and tell the rest of your institution how to change. Thank you very much for your time.